So let's get comfy and take a look at the final piece of this unit on knowers and knowing. Okay, I mentioned this term in the last presentation, the idea of second-hand knowledge. So what that essentially means is that knowledge is not necessarily an individualistic pursuit. It's a communal one. So through language, we are allowed to pass on knowledge from one generation to the next, whether that's spoken language or written language. And another way we pass it on is through culture, okay? So the existence of culture means that rather than constantly reinventing the wheel, we can transmit knowledge from one generation and one culture to the next, okay? The part that we have to be careful about is when transferring knowledge, we accept that knowledge, especially when we're young children, through authority, right? So some authority will pass that knowledge on to you. And the downside of that is the possibility of what's called authority worship. So this means that you just accept what you're told without actually analyzing it. And part of TOK is to step back and make sure that that's not happening. So knowledge by authority, okay, is being transferred to you through school. I mean, that's what I'm essentially doing now. I'm the authority transferring knowledge to you, and you are in the position to accept or reject that knowledge. Cultural tradition, right? So someone from your culture, your elders, could be transferring knowledge. The internet is a source of knowledge that you might or might not consider an authority in the particular subject area that you're studying. Books, media, etc. Transfer that knowledge, and each of these sort of areas has their advantages and disadvantages. So in culture, we grow up in a certain culture that has what I like to call default settings. So you set things in your culture that are just things you accept. Okay? So here's the example of the clock. What if our culture grew up with a 10 position clock and not a 12 position clock? If you grew up in that culture, that would be your default. That would be the kind of clock setting that you're used to. Okay? One example I may have brought up to you guys before was the idea of your birthday. When you were a baby and you were born, you don't remember it, but it happened, and then you made it 1 year and you had your birthday. Right? Remember your parents, maybe you've seen pictures of it. How old did you turn on your first birthday? How old were you? 1. In some cultures, you turn 2 because you're born 1. Okay? One of the grade 12s came from Korea. That's the culture there. So you're born 1, which means on your first birthday you turn 2, which means although she was sitting with all her classmates, she was in Korea, she would have actually been 19 in her class. So she was actually 19. Actually, no, pardon me, she was 20 because she took a year to learn English when she first came to Canada. So she was already 18, and then she was turning 19, but if she was in Korea, she'd actually be 20. So there's a 20-year-old grade 12 student in this building right now based on cultural differences, okay? And for her, that's normal. That's the default setting based on her cultural tradition. So the knowledge has that cultural component to it. School, obviously, is a big part of knowledge transition, okay? Now let's I like to do a little math with this. This is actually off a day. It's actually 173 days of school this year. So this is a little bit old, but let's just take that 172. So classes here at Sturgeon Heights are about 70 minutes. So I'm going to make a couple assumptions here. 5 classes a day, 350 minutes a day. 350 minutes times 172 days is 60,200 minutes a year in class. Times that by 12 years of public school, and then divide that by 60 minutes, gives you the number of hours. Divide that by 24 hours, gives you the number of days. And let's divide that by 365. Think about that for a second. I know it's a rough estimation. You've been sitting in school by the end of graduation by 1.37 years. Not even sleeping, just 1.37 years of you sitting in school. Now, that's a fair amount of time when you break it down like that, from the age of kindergarten to now. And let's say it's not even that. Let's say let's half that. Let's say my estimation is way off, because I know you didn't have 70-minute periods in kindergarten. You didn't. But let's say it was even half that. That's still a lot of time to be in school to supposedly give you mastery of knowledge of various subjects. Now, even though we have all that time as public school teachers, it's impossible for us to teach you everything in that time. School curriculums have to initially select and deselect things that they're going to teach you. Even this TOK course made a choice. Well, this is going to be the stuff you have to teach the kids, and this is stuff we're going to leave out, right? Classic example was just last period. I introduced the knowledge is justified true belief, but I didn't address that thing called the Gettier problem, which is a classic challenge to that epistemological definition. So this raises the question, what's the difference between education and indoctrination? Okay? Some might argue that education really is not about what you're taught, but how you're taught it, or the way that it's taught. Some might say that a good education is good no matter what the curriculum. It doesn't matter what you're learning. Education will be good if it encourages you to learn beyond just factual information. We talked about that last time, the difference between just learning a bunch of facts and actually knowing something. Okay, so let's now look at the internet. This might be the go-to for you guys in your generation. When you need information, when you want to know something, it might be the go-to place to get the information. Now, there's a lot of advantages to the internet. It's fast. It's vast. Fast and vast. It has a lot of information that you can get at incredibly quickly. The disadvantage is there's no quality control. Anybody can put anything there, and there's nobody necessarily judging what's good and bad. So this idea of critical thinking is perhaps even more important now than ever. Don't believe everything you read on the internet, okay? Judge reliability. What makes something good and what makes something bad? You need a set of tools to be able to do that. Okay, now this idea of experts. So-called experts who are going to give you their opinion on something. So if you want to know about physics, I might direct you to Mr. Libby as an expert on physics. If you wanted to know about power mechanics, I might direct you to Mr. Plotnick as an expert in power mechanics. The expert level is what we rely on. We rely on these so-called experts. But there's two things to keep in mind with that. Sometimes they're wrong. And they might not even know they're wrong, but sometimes they're wrong. And even experts are limited in how competent they are. So those are two very simple things, that they could be wrong and they don't necessarily know everything you need to know about that subject. Okay, now let's turn to media, which could include news media, books, etc. I'll specifically talk about the news media. We think they're objective. We know that in a lot of ways they aren't. If you use a classic example like the American news network, Fox News, they don't even claim to be objective. They say, you know what, we're going to put our opinion out there, okay? So here's the three general critiques of media. That they often focus on bad news. That they don't like to report good news things, that bad news is always going to get bumped to the top in a news broadcast, okay? They also focus on extraordinary news. They're not going to necessarily come and report on what you had for breakfast, right? They're only going to deal with stuff that's more appealing to sort of the extraordinary size and stuff that's relevant. They're not necessarily going to report some murder that happened in Zimbabwe here in Canada because it's not relevant to us here. So that is a good set of criterion, but it limits what knowledge is coming through the media itself. So what I'm going to present to you guys now are some tests for truth that are traditional truth tests that help you kind of make decisions about how to consume this knowledge. The three tests that we're going to look at are not going to tell you that one thing is true and one thing is false, but they help you to sort of place knowledge on that continuum. Like, whereabouts does it fall? So it kind of judges probabilities of likelihood, okay? So the three truth tests are the coherence, the correspondence, and the pragmatic test. And those are fancy words. They're actually very simple. But I like to, again, present those big fancy words to you guys so you can present them in things like essays or presentations. That's part of a TOK teacher's job, is to teach you guys some fancy words to make you sound smart. Maybe that's how I got the job. I just fooled people into thinking that. Again, they don't get at true and false answers, but what they do is help you place knowledge claims along that sort of position between true and false. Okay, so let's look at coherence. We've talked about that word before. Coherence just means to fit. So the coherence test simply means, does this fit with what I already know? The way you do this test is you use your brain. You think. Okay? If someone was to tell you, I can make it rain today, you immediately produce the coherence test on that claim. You go, well, wait a minute. Does that fit with what I know? Can a man actually control the weather? This doesn't make sense. This doesn't fit. And right away, it might fail the coherence test for you. It's like, you know what? You're full of crap. I don't believe you, right? So that knowledge claim is rejected by you instantly if it fails the coherence test. It doesn't fit with what you already know. And this will change as you know more, right? When you were like 2 years old and I said to a 2-year-old, hey, I can make it rain today, the 2-year-old might have passed that coherence test. He might have went, oh, he can make it rain today. That seems like it fits. He's a grown-up, and grown-ups have magical powers, so maybe that can work. So those claims will easily be accepted or rejected based on your coherence tests. Okay. So we use this test to judge how likely a claim is to be true. Okay? So we hear about someone's behavior, some military action, some supernatural intervention. We ask the question, is this claim plausible? Does it fit? Is it consistent with what I know? Does it make sense to me? So the coherence test is simple. Just use your brain and think. The second test is the correspondence test. So if it seems to fit, it's like, well, that claim seems reasonable, but you're not willing to accept it yet. Oh, I'm not sure if that's going to... You often go to the correspondence test, which simply means, I'm going to go check it out. I'm not sure if it makes sense in my brain, so I got to go check this out. Now, what you do for that depends on the claim itself, right? So you say, well, wait a minute, I'm not sure if I should believe this. It seems reasonable, it seems like it could fit, but I got to go check this out, right? So before we even saw that up there, if I told you that Canada won the gold medal in curling today, you might go, well, that seems to pass the coherence test. They had a good shot. But you may not believe me until you went and actually checked it out. You checked on your phone. You went on the internet. You asked a few more people to check out my claim. In some of these coherence tests, you actually have to do a test, right? Some scientist presents a fact to you. You might have to actually do the test yourself to accept it, depending on the claim itself. So the correspondence test simply means go check it out. Okay? So coherence test, think about it. Does it make sense? Correspondence test, go check it out. And then finally we come to the pragmatic test. And at this point the pragmatic test is kind of optional. Because you might be okay with the claim at that point. Some teacher will present a knowledge claim to you today. You think to yourself, okay, coherence test passed. It made sense. Correspondence test, don't need to go to it necessarily. I'm okay with it just at the level of the coherence test. Or maybe I had to check it out. Maybe what my teacher told me, I had to read in my textbook to make sure it lined up. Okay, it passes that. What the pragmatic test is basically, okay, well, can I actually use this claim? What good is it? Tell me what I can do with it. Because sometimes you get claims put at you, very often in this class, and you might think to yourself, well, I don't need this information. This is nothing I can use, okay? So the pragmatic test basically means, does this give a practical outcome to me? Can I use this information? Does it work for me? So you evaluated the knowledge claim, it's passed the other two tests, if necessary, and now you just say to yourself, can I actually use this? We accept methods that work in areas such as the sciences and the applied sciences by test and observational results. Sometimes you accept the claim even if you don't need to necessarily use it, and it depends on the claim itself at what level these three tests will apply. Okay, now, like all knowledge claims, the pragmatic test gives a tentative truth. In other words, you are willing to change your mind depending on the outcomes of the practical situation for which it's applied to. These three truth tests are not perfect, but they do give you some sort of starting point with your knowledge claims. So as some teacher or some kid walking in the hallway gives you a knowledge claim and you have to make a decision, am I going to accept it or reject it? These 3 tests are kind of a formal way to look at those claims themselves. Do I accept new information? Do I accept a new theory or a new idea? Do I get fooled by somebody? The 3 truth tests are a place to get started with. Okay, so now what kind of knowledge claims are there out there? Well, there are different types of knowledge claims. So I'm going to attempt to categorize a few of them. First one would be a rational claim. So rational claims make use of rational thinking. Very mathematical, like that math equation you see up there. You justify those claims by using your reasoning often. You don't have to necessarily go to a pragmatic test. You might, but you don't necessarily. You might just be able to just using your reasoning, just using a coherence test, go, you know what? That makes sense rationally. Those might also include things like definitions, right? This is what a cat means. Okay, I accept that. You don't necessarily have to see a cat to accept it. The next one would be observational claims. This is where you use your sense perception. So when we look at that unit, what kind of claims would fall under that category? Well, these would be claims that you need to observe, whether through your sense of sight, or your sense of hearing, or your sense of smell, or a combination. We need to see it. And often we need to extend that through things like technology. So I have to see it through a microscope, or I have to see it through glasses, or I have to see it on a photograph, or in a video. The next claim type would be a value claim. Now, these would be things like tall, short, hot, cold. Okay? If I tell you it's 30 degrees Celsius, that's an observational claim. That's me observing that scale on the thermometer. But if I told you it's hot out today, that's not an observational claim. I'm not observing hot. That's a value claim. I'm making a value judgment saying it's hot outside. Now, someone in the Caribbean might not say that when it's 30 degrees out. They might not say it's hot out. For us in Canada, it's probably better, we always use this example, when someone from, like I was just in Florida in December, and they said, man, is it cold out today? And yet I was outside in shorts and a t-shirt, right? And they always say that. It was crazy Canadians, you know. It's a value judgment. Words like hot is a value judgment. 30 degrees, no one's arguing that one. That's observational. That guy's tall, or she's really short. That test was easy. That test was hard. He's a good person. Those are value claims, okay? They're claims of value, not claims of observation. If it reaches 42, few would disagree that it's hot outside, but some still might. It's a value judgment until the claim is put to an observational test. It's a fact, or is it an opinion, okay? And then the next one I want to talk about is metaphysical claims. Now, these again are claims outside of reality itself, outside of the physical reality. They're different than observational claims in that they cannot be tested with sense perception, but this whole idea of meta, the word meta means beyond, right? So it's beyond the physical. Like value judgments, they can have a large number of people agree or disagree. Is this hot? Is this cold, right? But again, maybe the tests cannot be applied to things beyond that which we cannot apply the test to. So here again is where we push the TOK course a bit more into the realm of philosophy as we push beyond that. Because again, we don't want to necessarily always just ground the TOK course in just pure mathematical sort of reasoning areas. We have to go beyond. You have to, often in the TOK course, it's this idea of circling up into the clouds. I'll discuss that analogy in grade 12 a little bit more. Okay? That's what I have for you today. Actually, maybe I'll quickly discuss it now, but let me just turn off today's video.